Hey everyone, Tony D and little Joan here, who won't sit in her bed, and here to talk to you about Dr. Ron Paul. Dr. Ron had a bit of a scare today. He was doing his live stream, and he maybe had a stroke or a mini stroke, and it was a little bit scary. He kind of just started staring and babbling nonsense, and then the camera cut away, and the guy he was doing a live stream with was like, Dr. Paul? Um, so he ended up in the hospital, but he seems to be recovering and doing nicely, if you haven't heard. So thumbs up to Ron Paul. But as you can see, I have my Ron Paul 2020 or 2012 sign in the background. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Ron Paul and why I'm a big fan and why I think you should be too. It's all about being a libertarian, and I was kind of heading towards libertarianism, but Ron Paul was able to explain a lot of the concepts in such a way, that I could understand them. They're often very complicated and convoluted because they have to do with economics, and economics tends to be a very boring subject. But Ron Paul has a way of crystallizing those concepts because he knows them so well that anyone can understand. So I'll give you an example. He talked about in one congressional hearing how the dollar had lost, I think it's over 95. I think it was 95% at the time. It's like over that now. Like 95% of its value. And his illustration was, from that time period, if you take a dime, which is, one that's actually made of silver. I got to put you down. You're too squirmy. One that's actually made of silver. What is its real value? And the answer is like about $40, I think. I think dimes are. I think you got about an ounce of silver in the old dimes. So I believe it's like, it was probably more than that. It's probably like 40, $50 for an ounce of silver, I think. Probably even more. I don't know. I haven't checked prices on silver in a long time. And it's not that the dime lost its value or that the metal lost its value. It's that the dollar did. Right? So the dollar went down in price. So now you'd have to pay 40, $50 for the same dime. And back in the day when that dime was 10 cents, what could it buy you? Well, it could buy you basically what 40 or $50 could buy you now, right? It could buy you a meal and a room, a cheap room, but a room nonetheless. It could, a movie was a nickel and you got a bag of popcorn with it and all that kind of stuff. Same thing. That's made of silver too. I think there's more silver than nickel actually. Weirdly enough, I don't know why that happened. Anyhow, but that was one of the simple concepts that sort of drew me towards Ron and what he was talking about, and I finally started to understand. Oh yeah, this is all about money. And the other concept was, and this is the core concept of libertarianism, is the non-aggression principle. Now, libertarians argue about this all the time, like, what does it really mean? How do you apply it? And blah, blah, blah. But basically, it's the non-aggression principle is something like you don't aggress against anyone. You can defend yourself, but you don't attack people, basically. And the government is essentially a monopoly on force, and the only way they really enforce their laws is they're not voluntary, right? I mean, you don't voluntarily pay your taxes, really. You pay your taxes because otherwise they'll come and arrest you. They'll throw you in jail, or they'll fine you first, and then they'll tell you to come to court. And when you don't come to court, what do? Well, they put out a warrant, and if the cops ever stumble into you, you'll be arrested. You'll be forcibly put in jail. If you resist, you could be manhandled or shot and killed. So, the non-aggression principle is about trying to build a society in which there is, as little aggression as possible. Now, we have hardcore members in the libertarian movement called ANCAPs, and this stands for anarcho-capitalist. And those guys basically don't want any government whatsoever. A bit extreme, in my view. It also fails to take into account that we have other people in the system who, they have different views, and they're not going to be. I mean, it's hard enough to get people to look at libertarianism, to look at the hardcore libertarianism. Well, you're definitely going to turn people away. So there's always going to be some amount of compromise, but libertarianism has a lot to offer, even if it's just steering things in that general direction. So, for instance, Ron was always very anti-war, which was the main reason I sort of gravitated towards, what he was saying. And, the idea of the non-aggression principle is, well, you don't attack other countries. Now, if a country attacks you, you obviously defend yourself. And, part of the problem is, how do you define defense? Was it defending ourselves to actually go to Germany and invade in World War II and invade, Japan? Well, the argument is, and it's pretty obvious, we had to, because, we couldn't just kick them out of the country and hope they wouldn't come back. We had to depose the people trying to attack us or destroy enough of their stuff that they didn't have the means to come back again, which is the idea. And then it starts to get very gray after World War II, right? And even, Ron and some of the libertarians have interesting discussions about World War II, whether or not we should have ever gotten involved, because, a lot of people forget that the leader of the Germans in World War II, and I won't say it because weird YouTube rules, he attacked his only ally, or one of his allies, Stalin. He attacked Stalin, and he was at war with Stalin before we entered the war. And, they were destroying each other. And really, Stalin was, in some ways, worse. He killed more people, killed more of his own people, but they were both, horribly, horribly bad. And perhaps if we had let them continue to fight it out, they would have killed each other. And we would have not lost people in our country. And perhaps I always theorized that we'd be 10 years further along in our technology had we stayed out of a war like that, right? Because we put all those resources and things kind of grind to a halt. Although, another theory is we got all that technology from the war. Like, they innovated to, go in, and they were forced to, and we stole a bunch of stuff from German scientists at the end of the war, too. Maybe, it's hard to say when you're talking about alternative histories, but the point is, these discussions are important, and you don't really get these kinds of discussions in the Republican or Democratic parties, if you ever did. Maybe way back in the day, but certainly not now. And it's important that we, I think, incorporate not only libertarians, but other third-party ideas, at least give them a listen. I mean, yeah, some of them are going to be very wacky, but, people always complain, oh, there's only two people to vote for, and I hate them both. Well, you got to try other parties. And, you may not agree with everything libertarianism has to offer, but it's definitely worth looking into, I think. Especially if you find yourself unable to vote for Trump, but you realize just what an absolute train wreck Joe Biden is, and how awful he will be if elected. So I got to thank Ron Paul and the way he explains things, and I wish him all the best. His son is, of course, Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul, and he's more of a Republican who leans libertarian. A lot of people think, oh no, he's a secret libertarian. I don't think so. I think he's more of a Republican that leans that way. You know, it would be great if Rand announced, "Oh, I'm going to be a libertarian now," and Justin Amash is going to be libertarian, and we elected 2 more, and now we got a Libertarian Caucus. But you know, that may not be in the cards for a long time. Although there is a guy in, I think he's running in Alabama, who has a decent shot of winning. I think he's running for either state senator or senator. I'm not sure. Which would be very interesting because I don't think Alabama has ever had any kind of real libertarian presence. A lot of it's all been jammed up in New Hampshire. Another thing to Google, if you want to learn about libertarianism, you can check out Mises.org, MISES .org. You could Google the First State Project. Very interesting project. And you could just Google libertarianism, and the Libertarian Party itself. It's a bit of a mixed bag right now. You could go there, but it's more of the McDonald's of libertarianism right now. Let's say. Another site is Antiwar.com. I think is pretty good. It's not pure libertarianism. It's more pure anti-war stuff. But it was founded or co-founded by a libertarian, Justin Raimondo, and his works also influenced me greatly. But you should check out Ron's Liberty Report and a lot of Ron's videos, because it could really enlighten you on things like economics and war, and he just puts things in a nice, easy, understandable way. Like, when he talked about the Iraq War, and people were making the argument, well, we can't just leave now that we've got all these people depending upon us, and the whole place will go back to the Taliban, and they'd make all these excuses, and Ron would just say, well, we marched in, we can march out. And it's true. You sort of let the chips fall where they may. And when you read about this stuff, you realize, well, a lot of times by occupying a country, we're doing more harm than good in the long run. Ron Paul has done, I think, a lot for this country. You could also look up the 2012 election, see how he got shafted. Kind of like Bernie Sanders did by the Democrats, only it was the GOP. And, I would suggest you check out his books and check out his site, and hopefully Ron will be a continued source for liberty inspiration, and hopefully you'll check him out too. So that's it. Ron Paul, keep on living, buddy.